So back before we had our daughter Theodora, when I seemed to have so much time, yes, I watched all of these type reality shows, and I watched Hoarders. I was just talking to someone who watches every episode, and we were like, did you watch the rat episode? And, you can go down some rabbit holes or some rat holes with Hoarders. But I loved Hoarders, and yet it hit pretty close to home because my grandparents were hoarders. And when they died, they had a manufactured double wide, because they gave the family home to my aunt and uncle. They had a manufactured double wide with a full cement basement. And so when they died, we filled up at least 3 of the largest dumpsters, and then we took truckloads to the auction for other people to buy their junk, which then other families had to deal with. Now, hoarders and my grandparents are the extreme, yet it's very easy for us to collect and to gather stuff in our lives, whether it be baseball cards or Lego sets or stamp collections or items for our puppies or Dopey's, hypothetically the dwarf Dopey. We can all collect things. Well, this is our sermon series on Thrive, about how not just to survive, but how to thrive with God in every aspect of our life. Last week, we talked about our finances and how to live on enough, because when we live beyond what God has given us, finances weigh heavily upon us and push out God. And we took tangible steps on how to live on enough. And so today we're going to learn from Jesus' words on the Sermon of the Mount. And this is like Jesus' longest and considered his greatest sermon. And Wyatt's going to read for us Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 21.
Rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. No one can serve 2 masters, for you will hate one and love the other, and you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. This is the word of God for us, the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Thanks, Wyatt. So this section comes in the greater part of chapter 6. And so it's interesting to put this teaching of Jesus in context, because chapter 6 starts with Jesus preaching on giving to the needy, that it's our responsibility to care for others. Interestingly, last week, we read from Ecclesiastes, and the passage just before what we studied was also about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and God instructing the people to live differently. So this is an ongoing issue in humanity. And so Jesus starts out chapter 6 by saying, give to the needy, that this is important. And then he goes on in the middle of chapter 6 to talk about prayer and fasting, those spiritual disciplines. And as he talks about prayer, that's where he teaches us the Lord's Prayer. And then when he ends with prayer and the Lord's Prayer, there should be, can I have this? Can you hear me now? There we go. We did have before church a breaker blew, so I was worried that was it, or my new microphone just died. Anyway, okay. Breathe you in, oh God. Where was I? So he had just gotten finished teaching us how to pray, Our Father who art in heaven, blah, 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 blah. And then it goes in verse 19. Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them, rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Now, the first phrase, don't store up treasures here on earth, that's a very English translation. Because if you get to the Greek, it's really interesting. It's don't store in the storehouse, basically is the best translation. Because it says don't, in the Greek, it's don't store up. The King James says lay up. Or other English translations are accumulate. So don't lay up or accumulate. And then the very next Greek word that we translate as treasure is really the storehouse where you put good things. So that's not a great English translation, right? But it's saying don't accumulate things in the place where you store good things. Because Jesus is trying to say here is that the storehouse contains what we value. And so then we translate it, don't store up treasures here on earth. I mean, that's the closest English translation, but it's also saying, in the good place, don't put stuff, because that's not what we value. And so Jesus is being very clear, like, if you store up things on earth, what's going to happen to that, right? I'm good now, they tell me. There we go. I'm going to leave this here just in case. And so Jesus is telling us, like, don't store up all this stuff. What's going to happen to it? Moths will eat it. It'll just rust. Or like thieves will break in and steal it. It's a reminder, last week in Ecclesiastes, it literally said, you can't take it with you. And so what Jesus is questioning us this morning, what are you storing up? My grandparents created a very tight-knit family, and that was one of their values and one of the things they translated down to us. So much so that there will be 30 at my parents' house on Thanksgiving because you just don't miss family holidays. And when I was growing up, at least once a month, it was every Sunday till my mom became a pastor, so at least once a month, you would go to grandma's house for Sunday dinner. And everybody was there. And in a double wide, 20 people is a lot. But we would all eat together. And I remember our very last gathering in their home, Warren went once. So my very first year of marriage, they had to stop Sunday meals. Not because of their health, but because there was no longer any room in the house to host 20 people. And their stuff began to, they didn't ever realize it, but their stuff became more of a value than hosting the family that they adored. And that's the way it is for each and every one of us. Jesus is trying to teach us, what are you storing up in that place for all good things? Because that stuff, they couldn't take it with them. It was a very disgusting 3 days of cleaning. Our stuff, our hoard, our collections, the internal stuff that we carry, all pushes God aside. It gets in the way of what truly we value. And so Jesus is teaching us this morning that treasures of this world, they are temporary. You can't take it with you. This is a series on our finances and our stuff and our possessions. Because as humans, we're wired that if we think we have enough, we feel like we're in control, don't we? Oh, we got this, right? If I have in my 401k what whoever they are, say I need at this age in life, I'll be okay. I'll be good. My grandparents, it doesn't excuse it, and they were wonderful people, and I don't mean to put them down. They went through the Depression, and they had a farming background, and so my grandmother grew up with nothing, and every meal was a question mark for some years. And so her stuff, when she could have it, gave her comfort. But in the process, it pushed out other things. And that's a lesson for each and every one of us that Jesus is trying to teach us, because our treasures are not our first priority. Now, it says, store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. And now remember this in context, because he just taught us, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed, holy is your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's how we're to pray, right? Your will, O God, not mine. Your will, O God, not my 401k and my checking accounts. Your will, O God. And then he goes on to teach us, give us this day our daily bread. Not give us this day my giant for the week. Give us this day to live one day at a time, trusting and living with Jesus. And when he does that, when he teaches us how to pray, he teaches us how to stay connected with God and God's will for our life, living on that enough, that daily bread. And then, when that prayer is over, he goes on to teach us to watch our hearts, to watch what we think about so much and what we store up. Because the question for us, here's our action step this morning of how the scripture, God's word, can and will change our lives. Where will you put your heart and treasure? I learned this lesson. Warren and I, 8 years ago, taught a financial peace spirituality class together. And we did this because you have to have both spouses on board with your finances to do the class. So we taught this class together. And one of the activities, and I mentioned it this last week, but it's such an important exercise. Take your credit card and your bank statement and your Venmo. And do old school and print them out. And then take highlighters or red or different colored markers and mark them. Utilities and food, all one color, right? You can't change that. You do have to eat. Now that certain good beverage section of the giant, don't count that. But highlight. And then highlight your entertainment. How much do you spend on concerts or movie tickets, Netflix, Paramount Plus, Hulu, cable, and then others, like your restaurants, you're going out to eat, whatever works for you, and highlight that. And that will show you what you value, what's important to you. Warren and I learned 8 years ago that it was restaurants. And so I've kind of learned how to cook. Because that's my husband. Because as the teaching note says, media guy, where you put your heart, where will you put your heart and treasure? So I've had one of those weeks, and I don't tell you this to get sympathy or accolades or anything, but here's how my week went. Monday, a fender bender, but just enough to total my car. I know I loved my car. Tuesday, I'm in a staff meeting, and I needed to grab my phone to look at our church app, and I get the text that my car is totaled. Then 5 minutes later, Warren calls me, and I think I was just calling me to talk about the car because he got the sign, but then he calls me back when I don't pick up. And a family member had to go to the hospital, and I had to take them to the ER. And I had to sit in the ER until late that night. They're fine, whole family issues and dynamics. Then Wednesday, I had to rent a car because I forgot to add that on my insurance, and I had to rent a car because Thursday I had to go out of town for a mandatory 3-day meeting in Baltimore. But Thursday morning, we had a minor family emergency where I had to work on that all morning and was even late to my meeting. And now, so I spent all the downtime at my meeting looking for a car, not knowing what to buy, and tomorrow, because I only have a week's rental because I'm cheap and that's all I'm paying for, I got to go buy a car. Whew. Now, this is, of course, it's kind of stressful for anyway, and I share this because, look, I'm just like you, you know? We got aging parents or kids who can fall and you end up in the ER. A carburetor could just drop out any minute. It's usually transmissions, right? But, you know, we all have these things that happen. But the one thing I will say is the reason I tell you this is because now I've got to go buy a car. And I could be really stressed about this because I wasn't planning for a car until she turned 16, and then she could have my teeny little car with amazing safety features, right? But I'm not too stressed about having to buy a new car because 8 years ago, I took that class with Jesus, who gave us skills and tools to be able to get here. Now, let me be clear, it took 8 years. But living with the scriptures like that does change your life. So I can go buy a car tomorrow. It's going to hurt, but not as much as it would have 9 years ago. Then I would have just paid an obscene interest rate, and well, let's not go there. It takes time to reorient our lives. And let's face it, in the church or in polite society, what don't you talk about, right? Politics and money? And especially in church, you don't talk about money. But how we live with our money, it affects our lives. It affects how much time we spend with God. It affects our stress and our worry, and it affects our values that push out other things. Where your treasure is, Jesus says, there your heart will be. And it makes a huge difference when we apply his word to our lives. And this doesn't matter about socioeconomic status or what age we are. This hits each and every one of us. Because where your treasure is, there your heart will be as well. So our action steps this week, if you haven't done it, highlight your finances and figure out, what are you valuing right now? Do a physical and spiritual inventory of your stuff. Because whatever stuff we have, physical that takes up our lives, my mother-in-law who has something on every space of a coffee table, it affects your lives. But that inner stuff, that baggage, that also affects how we live and is not a treasure that we're storing up. And ask yourself, what do you need to get rid of to value your faith and what's important to you? And what do you need to store up that you haven't been, that you know God is telling you? Here are ways to store up your treasure in heaven. The angel tree. Those gifts will make a difference in children's lives. And if you look at some of those cards, they are heartbreaking. They are heartbreaking. One of the women at the first service, I was just standing at the tree trying to look for one for myself, and she said, I took one where the kid just asked for a furry blanket at 13. She said, so I had to get her a matching pillow as well, and I'm going to put a $5 bill in there. But that's heartbreaking. And so your gifts will make a difference. And you can also see how it changes our lives. Kevin has been talking about that Barbie set. And if you know Kevin well, Kevin doesn't talk much, and he only texts if you've been a friend of his for 15 years. But I got 2 texts from him this week. And then this morning, he was so excited, he had to take me out and see it. And then he got a Barbie doll to go with the Barbie house. And then there's puppies. And I only share this because it wigs me out. The dog births the puppies. Yes. But look, I know all that because Kevin is so excited to give, and he's so mortified. Am I talking about him right now? But that's what happens. Our lives are changed. Thea had to rush out of church last week. It was the youth retreat. She stank. She had something to do at home, and I'm like, go home. And she's like, I got to go get the angel tree. I'm like, I got keys. You could go anytime. But that's her, that's not me. That's her wanting to give, because that's the way that we store up our treasures in heaven. Another way to store up your treasures is to give of your time. That's a treasure, isn't it? And GHH is having a work weekend in January, and so it's to be thinking about that and blocking those dates off. They'll be on the screen next week. And then our Living Nativity is coming up. Thank you, the 8th. And your help is needed to make that happen, because we're going to boost that. And last year we had nearly 300 people in here, with only a fraction of that us. Most of them were not Aldersgaters, which is the goal. And so your help is needed to make that happen. And then your treasure is needed to make a difference through Aldersgate Church. There are giving boxes in the back. You can click donate with a credit card on our website, or you can Venmo us, because you've already heard how you're making a difference, and what you give supports all of that.